It just appeared. I didn't even notice it was here.
In the same way, I think it'd be really dumb for someone to go and take their paycheck, take it to the casino, put it all on black for the chance they might get some really, really good benefits. I think it's really dumb to risk New Zealand's economy on the chance that things will go well. I'm going to do two things in this speech, three things. Firstly, on setup. Secondly, on reliance of our economy. And finally, on certainty. Firstly, on setup. Why is the New Zealand economy at a massive risk of a shock? Firstly, because we're a small country, right, which means we have things such as specialist industries. This looks like dairy, this looks like tourism, which means that when New Zealand is hit, it often hits direct industries. This looks like, how when there's, a like downturn in the price of beef, because that's such an important aspect of New Zealand's economy, and it has such wide-ranging effects. And secondly, there's because of New Zealand, we have the climate. Because we're an island nation, we're super at risk things such as floods, things such as droughts with climate change. But also we're on like an earthquake fault line, which means those type of natural disasters are high risk. We also just think we have an obligation to the Pacific, which is probably going to have to get bailed out heaps with climate change. Right. There's also on reliance. The context here is that these restrictions are made by the government and have New Zealand's best interests in mind. This looks like not having too much of the economy in like one place, or in one sector, in one country. Looks like not trading with dodgy, people and countries, and it looks like long-term sustainability and like not cutting down all of New Zealand's trees to make a quick buck. Why does efficiency make us reliant on other economies? Firstly, because it means we can have key companies trade with bad actors. Why would these companies trade with bad actors? Firstly, because these poor countries often, will pay more for goods or have cheaper goods. Why? Because they don't care about things like human rights. They don't care about things like environmental sustainability. But secondly, there's just like less competition in these markets because a lot of traders see this as an incredibly undesirable market to enter, which means that like when the UK decides to not invest beef in Russia, then New Zealand could charge more for this. This means that we now have to cooperate with these bad actors, right? Because the government can't see mass job losses to New Zealand insofar that the economy is hit, right? Like if Fonterra decides to trade with China, it means that when China is less able to pay for goods, it means that it affects every dairy farmer in New Zealand. It means that New Zealand now has to they now have to support things like China's policies and make sure they're doing okay in a trade disagreement. On the second mechanism, we think we now just get reliant on scarce resources, right? Because often resources come from can come from one country because of natural abundance. This looks like things such as oil in Saudi Arabia, and these countries are incredibly intertwined in the New Zealand economy, right? Because if there's a surge in oil prices, that affects things such as shipments, that affects the ability for people to drive in cars. And so things like reserves, which we can only get on our side of the house, relieve pressure. Why does it do this? Firstly, because it means that we are able to, in a time when these prices are high, sell them to the firms at an affordable rate. This means you don't see massive price hikes. You don't see companies falling over because they can't afford to have these resources. The comparative is on their side when they use this kind of capital on incentives such as tax cuts, and it means that they're unable to do these in times of crisis. The outcomes here. Firstly, it just damages our international relations because people like AUKUS get the ick when we get into bed with China. But also, it just goes against our green values, right? At the point where trading with a country that's awful for climate change, that affects our clean green New Zealand brand. That means that like also that's really harmful to things like our dairy farmers, to people like our tourism. But it also just is something that New Zealand principally goes against, because I think New Zealand is pretty strong on human rights, and we like really don't want to, see things such as like trading with, countries that are committing genocide against their indigenous people. Second outcome is that we're just like more likely to have an economic downturn because we're trading with like more unstable partners. We have like more risk of that. That's super important in this debate because at the point where like we are trading with like people that are bad for us, there is a massive risk that when things hit, when crap hits the fan for them, when Russia, goes through massive production issues because of their fight with Ukraine, we are now also affected, and that's a massive harm in this debate. Right, on to certainty, but before then I'll take a PLI.
Okay, how do you plan on improving the economy when money goes straight into contributing to such thing you said and not to like actual things that can improve the economy?
But the money that we like have probably is going to help the economy at some point, right? Like our oil reserves are going to help the economy. But I also think the New Zealand economy, it's not like we're doing actively nothing, right? It's just we're focusing more so on it. I think that what this looks like is just allowing firms to work in their own ways, right? New Zealand has pretty heavy regulation. We still have firms that are operating successfully. I think that's far better than having constant collapses. Right, on certainty. How does resilience create certainty? Firstly, I think the focus on resilience shows the government's intention. This means it will help them in times of crisis, right? Which means they think they're willing to bail out a bank. They're willing to subsidize things in times of crisis. This looks like the wage subsidy during COVID. This means that firms know that trading in New Zealand is relatively risk-free, which means it is comparatively better than other country that won't. Which means when firms are weighing up where they decide to start their industries or whatever, they're more likely to choose New Zealand. That's more jobs. That's great for the New Zealand economy. But secondly, we think other firms will not collapse, which are often intertwined, right? If you're, a screw producer that collapses, that affects, the switchboard industry, that affects a whole bunch of other people. Government regulations that we can only have under our side prohibit risk. This looks like things such as sustainability laws, that we're not taking too much of our natural resources. That means our growth is at a sustainable level. But thirdly, we have a far more stable workforce because under their side of the house, they get a large amount of price spikes, which means that they're unable to have workers retained. Because when you see things like $18 for laundry powder or basic necessities that are unaffordable, people have to move to countries that they can afford to live in, which means that we have mass changes in work numbers, which are incredibly bad for companies. Right, the outcomes of this is people just feel anxious all the time, right? Because under their side, they're not sure if their job will live to see the next day. Now, we also just see a lot of smart minds that would get our economy moving, not coming to New Zealand at the point at which they don't want to see the risk of our prices, don't want to see the risk of our employment market. But secondly, we just see that firms don't come to New Zealand, right? Because they don't want to risk the fluctuation in the economy that could see them failing and falling over. This means that we have less competition in our market.
I'd like to speak for this speech and now invite the first speaker of the negative team up.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The affirming side have come up here and gave us a massive insertion that it is extremely dumb to risk New Zealand economy. Okay, we do not think this is true because they are trying to push this gross mischaracterization that New Zealand economy is under extreme risk of shock under outside of the house. Okay, first of all, I'm gonna later explain while under outside of the house with the efficient policy, this actually decreased New Zealand's chance of an economic shock and why it will actually be greater on their side of the house. Okay, I will first respond to, actually, I have two substantive points for you today. Firstly, on why having an efficient oriented policy actually improves the economy and greatly decreases the risk of economic shock. Then secondly, on why this side of the house, resilience-oriented policy cannot be effective when dealing with the economic shock. And then my second speaker today will do a split on how local and small business will be positively impacted on the outside of the house. Okay. So I'm just gonna first respond to some of the things that they brought up. Okay, so they say that like there is gonna be like a price increase. Okay, just to deal with this quickly, as the motion clearly stated, on the outside of the house, we actually encourage competition, right? And I will later talk why this is good. But when you encourage competition, this means that companies compete with each other. Either they increase the quality of their product or they decrease the price. Either way, this actually improves life quality for the consumers because they get either like decreased price or they get better quality product. Also, they said that like there will be bad international relations. First of all, they give like not very good mechanisms on why there will be bad international relations. But secondly, I'm gonna later explain. I'm gonna flip this on them and actually tell you why they got worse international relations on their side of the house. Overall, and then we also say that like we do have some things that are quite symmetrical on both sides of the house. So like as in like doing things that are like not dodgy, obviously, or like keeping things sustainable or stable. On outside of the house, we obviously have massive incentives not to deal with dodgy company because there's no sustainability in that. Like they weigh that, and then they obviously know not to deal with dodgy companies, and then they don't have like and then obviously they still have incentives to keep things to sustainable because the reason why is this. Okay. The reason why is sustainability, we agree, very important. And this is especially important for the current government that we see for New Zealand. This is National, right? National is a party that is extremely economically driven. And one of the major promises to coming into office is to improve the economy, right? And generally people this is what they want. They want to improve the economy, which is why National has been voted in. That's why they're currently in office, right? Okay, so a POI as I've raised for the side is that like I asked like how do they plan on improving the economy? The affirming side gives no mechanism on how they improve the economy, and they say that it will improve at some point. That like there is no clear. It's not clear, it's not likely, etc. But I'll prove to you why it's likely on our side. Okay, firstly, on my first attempted point, why having an efficient orientated policy will actually improve the economy. Okay, we agree that it is more risky under outside the house. But if you listen to the phrase risk it for the biscuit, okay.
Why?
The phrase, okay, so on the outside of the house, what do we agree with? We agree with like lowering barriers to trade and investment. So this could look like financial barrier where they lower taxes or they make things cheaper. It can also look like legal barriers. To give you an example of this could mean that instead of just allowing citizens to be involved in trade and investment, they could now, for example, allow immigrants to be involved in trades and investment. And this is obviously quite important because we have more people involved in it. We have migrants who, as they said, is like people with like great minds. They're coming into New Zealand, they can trade and invest, and this actually boosts international relations, right? Okay, what else do? We remove regulations that impede competition. This means we boost competition. This looks like we lower taxes for business, for example. We allow more people to start business and things like this. And as I've said, when we increase competition, this either decrease prices or improve quality of product. Okay. On the counterfactual, what do we have? On their side of the house, they want to restrict trades of key technologies. So what this means is they're basically trying to make New Zealand gatekeep their technology, right? Okay, first of all, this isn't very good because New Zealand is a small country. Firstly, they are very unlikely to have a decent tech that can fully hold them out during an economic shock. Because what does an economic shock look like? It looks like every citizens suffering. It looks like no one being able to afford necessity. It looks like people having to sell away their houses because of mortgage they can't afford, or become homeless because they can't afford rent. It looks like an economic shock that lasts for a long time, right? And this is extremely hard to recover. So we say that it's like very hard for like New Zealand as a small country, they can't compete with large country like China, US, and a relatively new country to have a tech that is so advanced that it can hold out at an economic shock, right? But meanwhile, what do we have on the outside of the house? We have we encourage trading because it expands global connections, trading with bigger countries, and we can form positive relation. And then they also tend to be richer. If we look at conversion rate, right? And then with that, they can get money that get allocated back into the government through taxes. This improve the economy, and then competition is incentivized. Okay, so now that money is going back into the government, this means that they can reinvest into better quality production, right? They're able to continue producing at a high standards, and they have the capacity to charge more. Government can also get out of the debt cycle and then organize an emergency fund. Logical primacy is quite important in this debate. I will later expand on that. Okay, and then money can also go into benefits for the taxpayer, and then you can have, now is when you have the capacity to subsidize for groceries. Okay, outcomes of this. What we stand for outside of the house is to spend money to make money. On their side of the house, yes, they don't spend money, but that means they never make money. That means the economy in no way is able to improve. Either it stays the same or it gets worse. What do we stand for outside of the house? We stand for an improving economy. What the rest of New Zealand citizens stand for, right? We stand for the way that we can improve economy by making more money, and when you get money, you can invest into new things, creating a positive feedback loop. Okay, and this is extremely important because this creates sustainability for New Zealand, and this is what the people of New Zealand stand for. Okay, I'll take actually, never mind, sorry. Okay, so secondly, on why resilience-oriented policy cannot be effective. Resilience is very, what does it look like in the context of New Zealand? It looks like on their side of the house, having large backup sums of money in the bank, right? It looks like having backup resources or like core and then gatekeeping it until it's a necessity. So how are these materials used to mitigate the harms of economic shock? Like what they're trying to stand for is they have backup money that they can like subsidize for groceries during an economic shocks. But this will not work because money is finite. Like you're screwed if you run out of money. Like after 2 weeks you subsidize, people are starving now. Grocery stores prices will become higher because they feel the economic shock. And then also gatekeeping resources is very bad because this restricts New Zealand from improving. They can't learn from countries like US, China, Russia, who are economic powerhouses, who currently have the resources, the capability, the manpower, and now we're like just stopping ourselves from improving like they are. Okay, and then that means we can never improve as a country. As a country, we know we're in debt, and that means that on this side of the house, it will get even worse. Okay, overall, the impact, the outcomes of this, it ruins international relations. This is bad because they will not help you during an economic shock. And then and then they focus way too much on like national resources, and then international resources is just like neglected. And for those reasons, I'm proud to negate. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for his speech, and now invite the second speaker of the affirmative team.
When negating case starts to crumble is when negating's case starts to crumble way faster than the New Zealand economy when they tell you actually that New Zealand just doesn't undergo economic shock. That is just not factually correct. That is something they cannot claim and actually just loses the debate from like the start. Right? Three things to talk about in this speech. Firstly, just like what does economic shock look like and why is this likely, like why does this occur? Secondly, just like the New Zealand economy and like all like the benefits they try to claim in terms of like how we're going to benefit the economy and boost it. And then thirdly, around like the international relations of New Zealand. Right then, firstly, what does economic shock look like? What we hear from Negating is that like economic shock just does not happen in New Zealand because we're just like not that unstable, right? There was no mechanization around this, first of all. I just like to call that out. They cannot just like make this assertion with no backup here. Why does economic shock happen? It's just common, right? Like consumers methods change. If consumers like change the way they're going to react to like supply, that inflation like happens. That means that new firms like the new firms that they're like talking about how they're going to increase through the competitive market, they don't have as much of like a leeway to be able to provide to this inflation. And what that means is that these new firms don't last in the market. This means these new firms go down. When these new firms go down, their whole of their benefits literally just collapse because these new firms can no longer bring down those prices as they're claiming. What's happening on the comparative then? On the comparative, when these like firms are actually going down, prices are rising. This is really, really bad because they actually like the consumers that they're talking about that they're benefiting don't actually get benefited. Right then, I proved to you that economic shock is likely to happen because like consumers just change the way they like deal with products. Therefore, we have like inflation. We see this through like the cost of living crisis, etc. Right then. Secondly, on like the New Zealand economy, here they claim like they make their main claim that like they decrease like their competition decreases prices because they increase competition through like the info slide, right? So I think firstly, all competitive firms are also affected despite economic shock. They also have to deal with the repercussions of that. They can't just like circumvent like the COVID laws when they happen. They couldn't just like not go about it. What this means is that when the shock hits them, they have to either go down because they don't have like a very sustainable like business because they weren't able to like keep that resilience really high, or they have to like increase the prices. This means consumers don't buy from them. This means that ultimately that company isn't making any profit. It either gets acquired by like a bigger company, which means that bigger company is just like a monopoly now. They can just like raise the money however they want. They can just determine everything. That's so much worse for consumers on their side. But or they just like they can't afford to pay their staff, so they just increase it so much and like they eventually just die out, right? So at the end of this, we tell you that even if like the price decreases for a little amount, in the long run, this isn't going to be very harmful because when economic shock has hit, which I explained to you why it will, that means that like these companies won't be able to last. This competition does not exist any longer then. Then secondly, what was their second claim here? They told you here that like this is just going to be like provide cheaper goods overall. So I've already explained why this would be the case, but if we just like take it at their best, I'll explain to you why they can't get this. Right then, this is because we tell you here that we can get better, cheaper goods from this because what we do is we actually allow like overseas firms to come to New Zealand. Why is this? We're much more appealing as a country when we have resilience, we prioritize resilience. Why is this? Because when we prioritize resilience, we literally give them like all these opportunities in terms of like feeling safe to come here because when they go up, we have regulations in terms of economic shocks. The firms that are likely to move here are likely to be ones that have lots of money, right? Because to move, you need to have money to be able to like transport your goods over. You need to have money to be able to like organize land, like acquire staff, etc. This requires a lot of money. We make it more appealing for these firms to move over to New Zealand as opposed to like a competing country. And then when we have these firms move over, we actually are able to claim their benefit and increase competition because now we have more firms in like the market. So we generally just have more people. What will this mean on like why do we actually better out for them? When we have these firms moving over, firstly, we get more New Zealand people in job. This is such a good thing because all the people that they lose jobs, we actually have to keep them into job. And secondly here, when firms come over, it is like so expensive to like bring existing staff, so they will like need the people like in New Zealand, right? This is a really good benefit on our side of the house that negating just cannot like achieve. We think this like should be rated really highly because what they do on their side is like when economic shock hits and like these companies go down that they like increase the price of, it's like so unstable for these people because all of a sudden they lose their jobs. Now that's like so harmful for their economic stance and like their financial way. Right then. Why did I bring you like more firms will come over? We told you that it's like really appealing, right? But also we told you that like when like we're not trading with like all these like big like scary like international like dodgy companies, this will be really good. The only back like response here was like there's no incentive to like deal with like dodgy corps right there. Two things. I think like corps probably make them sound this sounds really good. So like when we say dodgy corps, we just say they're probably like more unstable, right? We're saying this looks like China. Why are you likely to trade with like China, right? We're likely to trade with China because when like when we have an increase in terms of like the regulations, more corps have the ability to do it. We naturally just see more corps like opting in for this option because if they're able to get like more imports from China and benefit themselves from the small term, they think that's like a trade-off they're willing to make, right? So then what this happens, what's the risk that we run here? The risk we run here is like if China now makes like this like international move, like siding with like invading Taiwan or like maybe like just sanctioning something, we now need to maintain that trade with China. We need to support them in this. This is really harmful because this puts us against like lots of other like major powers, e.g. like the US and stuff. This is not something New Zealand want to do because this also sacrifices our like geopolitical state, right? Okay then. At the end of this, what I proved to you, I proved that the New Zealand economy is far more stable on our side of the house, and we also attract a lot more like international like overseas corps into it, which is so beneficial for our economy. But I'll take a point now.
Why does China want to buy milk?
Sorry?
Why does China want to buy milk?
Well, I think China wants to buy milk on either side of the house. I'm not sure how that's completely relevant. But like we say that China will like buy milk on like our side is like, well, in fact they'll probably do it more because now you have less regulation, so like that's just like a good thing for them, right? Okay then, moving on. How do we improve like the international relations of New Zealand and why is this so important? We improve the international relations of New Zealand, as I told you, because we're not like cozying up all of a sudden to like China or like other key like trade partners that are a lot more unstable, and that means that like we're not damaging our relations with, for example, AUKUS. Why are they likely to be like really damaged if we do this? They're likely to be damaged because it dilutes like the image we've made of like our clean green image. But like they didn't respond to this. This was so important because it just goes against what New Zealand stands for, right? If it goes against what New Zealand stands for, people are likely to just like deem us as very unstable and not like a very good like trading partner. Therefore, we're not gonna get much like international relations. This is harmful for New Zealand in the future if we want to like continue to like be, because we are so reliant on like other countries overall. I think at the end of this, what Canterbury proves to you is we prove to you that we're actually able to get better economic stability, and insofar that we have like more resilient an economy environment than what Countess Manukau proposes. That is why I'm so proud to affirm.
And welcome the second speaker of the negative debate.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. When the affirmative team wants to come up here and hold New Zealand's money and hoard the profits that could be going out to local businesses, that could be going into increasing competition, thus decreasing prices, which means that the consumers on our side of the world actually are able to afford products and goods. We see that we actually get more cash flow on our side of the house. F is never able to prove that, or even note if they are able to prove that, it probably looks like further in the future. We tell you that economic shocks need to be dealt with currently, right now in the status quo, not 10 years down the line, not 20, not 40, now. What will I do for you in my speech today? I will firstly go over some clashes, one on the New Zealand economy, two on this idea of economic shocks, and three on international trade and relations. Then I will then on to extension on why and how local businesses will be impacted better on our side. Before I move on, I will take one point.
What happens to the New Zealand economy if there is no trees?
If there is no trees, one, I think you replant trees. Two, I think you go ask your environmentalist policy groups in Parliament on that issue. Okay, moving on into my actual questions. Firstly, on this idea of economic shock. What did Affirmative say on this, right? They told us that it is very common and that there's no less way consumers will not benefit because it happens more commonly. We heard a couple of things from Affirmative. What else? What do we say into response to this? One, we tell you that it's not contingent on New Zealand's economy within itself. We tell you that it is the impact of global economy and those international relations as first. We probably see this currently probably through war or obviously through sanctions on that. So note that it's not in the authority on the authoritative power of the New Zealand government to make those decisions. It is based on currently issues in the current status quo on the global scale. What that then means, however, on this idea that okay, we can concede maybe economic shocks do happen, but not to that extent. But on now to a more important point on the New Zealand economy, right? Note that if it's not based on New Zealand doesn't have choices to predict what will happen in the future, right? We then tell you they actually now have the government has to look for measures in order for it to get cash flow back into the economy. Now, what this doesn't look like is on the Affirmative side, that doesn't look like them hoarding their money just so that they can need it for necessity time, not like a reserve fund for your child who's going to college. No, we tell you that you actually need to spend this money on things. What does this look like? Or what did F try to tell you in how they would trade in terms of the New Zealand economy? They told us that competition of these firms actually means that the quality of their products will go down, or they'll have to increase their prices. And they told us a couple of lines that second, consumers will not buy into this, and that it'll be probably acquired by bigger companies. A couple of responses on this. Firstly, we told you that actually no, we increase competition between businesses in New Zealand, and therefore in terms of providing cheaper goals and those ideas. They try to tell us that what do you call it? We'll be more appealing for overseas investors so that they could actually buy from New Zealand and so forth. This is kind of a bit of a tension, I believe, on their side, because they didn't tell us oh, we're not going to be trading with dodgy countries, but now they are telling us that they can actually trade with dodgy countries on that front. So I'm just a bit confused on whether or not they actually are going to want to trade. Now, at the point where we tell you that New Zealand is struggling, at that point, we tell you that they don't have the capacity to fully be okay, we're not going to go probably trade with I don't know, Saudi Arabia, because probably their people do need the oil, right? Therefore, we tell you that they're not able to actually there is incentive and capacity values even at the expense of their green value. Just note right here that New Zealand's green value is not going to decrease significantly to the point of the outcome they're trying to tell you. What we note is that New Zealand already is on their high incline compared to other international companies, right? Therefore, we tell you that image is not going to be weighed heavily in this debate. And then on on the outcomes in terms of this economy, right? What did they tell you? They told us that there'll be more jobs and you should weigh this highly, right? Okay. Note I will get onto that later on into my extension point on just noting here that because like you're decreasing like prices, like production for like businesses. Note the businesses probably include big corporations and local businesses themselves. Local businesses then at that point are able to now actually be able to be like productive for their business, growing their business. One, you like saw these rise in small businesses during COVID era, right? Because a lot of people working from home. Therefore, we tell you because of like these decreasing prices, right? We tell you that they actually now have the capacity and obviously the incentive because they actually care about their families and want to make a living for themselves. But now they have the capacity to go out and what that then means is that they're able to like have more jobs for people. Partly this means on a local communal basis because these local communities are based within these areas that obviously are lacking currently on their side. Note we tell you that on their side they're never able to get to the same depth and level on that, so therefore at the end of this, right, we tell you that we weigh. You know, I'm just gonna get straight into like split because I'm already onto it currently right now, you know? Like, so therefore, like we tell you that local businesses are better affected because New Zealand, as I've already told you, has a growing market of these local businesses. It is a very profitable margin because now it is in the hands of New Zealanders, not in the hands of people from Saudi Arabia, from China, from Africa. Therefore, we tell you it is more an incentive and principle basis on what New Zealand government is actually able to want to look into. We tell you that currently in the national government, they already do have incentives to look at the economy and to increase therefore. And why would they actually care about these local businesses? As I've already told you, it's now become a rise and now like local businesses now should be becoming an integral part of society now because like obviously now comparatively on outside where we have more like what I've already explained in those in the rebuttals previously on how it works. Like, yeah. It means faster and more essential goods for these businesses, lower pricing, which increases the cash flow. And like in terms of like, at the end of this, you weigh in the terms of like one, small businesses are now into a position where they actually can contribute to the economy. Note that the principal values of these business owners are now being heard and seen by the government, which comparatively on their side is never able to be seen. We tell you that like it's like now they're actually making contributions. But now onto like a more local and incentive level, now we have local communities actually feeling a part and they can actually contribute into like to greater access to goods and supplies, which means that the like living will probably increase into an extent on our side. Note that that is never going to happen. So at the end of this, in terms of the New Zealand economy, because AF wants to weigh this so highly, we tell you that on our side, we actually get a more stable and for like the short term and in the long term, like the idea of the New Zealand economy not going to completely fail. Okay, now onto this this clash on like international relations. They like said we will trade with dodgy actors. Obviously we tell this is unlikely if they are that bad, right? Like I'm sure New Zealand at the end of the day probably still has some moral ideas and incentives not to go trade with someone who's injecting genocide, right? But we tell you that they still need to have that capacity and that like actual reasoning to go, probably not to the extent of maybe like Russia, but maybe go to maybe alternative prices, which they're never able to buy because they're just going to be stock marketing their profit into banks, as we've already said. So if we stand for a side that actually gets governments moving, people moving into livelihoods, stand for side proposition, so proud to negate.
I thank the speaker for this speech and invite the third speaker of the affirmative team.
The negating team, setting out at first, being willing to risk it for the biscuit in the context of the New Zealand economy is the crucial mistake they make, since their entire case revolves around them proving to you why the NZ economy is so valuable and important to the citizens of this country. 3 things to prove in my speech today. Firstly, why our version of economic shock is the most realistic. Secondly, why the New Zealand economy is benefited way more on our side of the house. And thirdly, why we maintain strong international relations better than the negating side of the house. But firstly, before I get onto any of these, I just want to clarify this whole kind of back and forth about this idea of like dodgy corporations, do we trade with them, do we not? So they ask at second for clarity around this and what the incentives are for New Zealand to either yes trade with these dodgy companies or not. So what Umgum tells you under this is that she tells you that corporations are probably going to make themselves look more appealing. So either New Zealand buys into that and they do trade with them, or they figure out that they are dodgy and they don't trade with them. However, secondly, I'm going to extend on her here. Why is it that New Zealand will trade with these corporations? Firstly, I think it's just because when New Zealand, on their side of the house, starts maximising their trade agreements and their investments, this means they get a taste of what it is like to be a bigger power. We know, and it's been established in this debate, that New Zealand is a considerably small power than the likes of China or the USA. So when New Zealand traders get this taste of powerful exports and forging these powerful agreements, this means they're going to want to do it more. This means they will likely, maybe it's consciously, maybe it's not consciously, jeopardise some of the integral structure of the New Zealand economy to form these trade agreements to gain more power because they think it will benefit the economy, which I'm going to go on to prove it won't. So, firstly, under economic shock, what is it that the negating team push here? They tell you that there's very little economic shock that happens in New Zealand, and that it's a huge it's really bad for citizens in New Zealand, companies in New Zealand, the NZ economy as a whole. We say that economic shock happens all the time. Economic shock looks like the cost of living crisis which we're currently in. Economic shock looks like a sudden rise of inflation when consumer behaviour changes because the supply for a certain good in a certain season of the year changes. This means economic shock happens all the time, meaning it is so important that you side with our side of the house, because on our side of the house we are prepared for this constant economic shock. If they're trying to convince you that economic shock doesn't happen all the time, this is just purely wrong. And on their side, it will still happen, and the difference is they won't be prepared. The mutually exclusive benefit to our side of the house is we are prepared for this economic shock because we know that it's just going to come. We're not going to delude ourselves into thinking that this economic shock will never happen because we know it will. So what do they tell you? They tell you that what we say here is contingent on the impact of the global economy, and that the New Zealand economy isn't the only thing that will influence economic shock. So what we tell you, even if you buy this from them, this is good for our side because this means it is so important for New Zealand to maintain a good global image, right? This means New Zealand needs to maintain siding with good trade agreements rather than siding with controversial trading partners such as China to a larger extent. But why? Because this means that the global impact will be even worse on the New Zealand economy, and we'll be able to protect ourselves from economic shock even less on their side of the house. They also concede at second that the economic shock won't happen to the same extent. They don't understand that new businesses will appear on their side in a more vulnerable position, so they can't react to this economic shock well. On our side of the house, we protect these large firms and companies that come over to New Zealand to provide prosperous business. We care about these companies because they flourish in the NZ economy and they bring way more business, way more jobs. I'll get into this a little bit later, but what I'm trying to emphasise here to you is that on our side of the house, we protect these huge contributors to the New Zealand economy on our side of the house. Because do you think it looks more attractive to a company from overseas to move to move to a country that is in a good position to combat economic crisis, economic shock, or to move to one that's just going with efficient policy, hoping that economic shock won't happen? I'll tell you, it is the first one. Why? Because a company doesn't want to uproot all of their staff, all of their goods, and transport all of this to a country unless they know they are in a stable economy, or on the other side, they're in an economy that is unstable, however, prepared for when it does become unstable. No, thank you. So at the end of the economic shock point, I've proved to you why economic shock does happen all the time and why it is so important to be prepared for it. So, secondly, onto the New Zealand economy and why we benefit this more on our side of the house. What does AF push here? What they tell you is that they'll win by proving that they get more short-term and long-term benefits for the New Zealand economy. In terms of these specific pushes, what they tell you is that they remove regulations to increase competition within New Zealand. We tell you that this competition is basically useless insofar as when all these firms collapse during economic shock, this doesn't do anything. All these regulations to increase competition don't matter because when the economy collapses under economic shock, this means that the competition is irrelevant because no one is going to be buying goods anyway. No one's going to be selling goods anyway in the height of this economic shock. They also push here and they tell you that local businesses are going to be better off because they become an integral part of the New Zealand economy and the New Zealand society. When economic shock hits on their side of the house and they are not prepared, which I've already proved they will not be, They aren't prepared, meaning that these small businesses become an even lower priority than they are on our side. Why is this true? Because when New Zealand is again plunged into like a cost of living crisis where inflation increases really highly and like prices are just rapidly fluctuating, what this means is that the New Zealand economy is like in a panic, right? The New Zealand economy still needs to make money, still needs to make imports, exports, business work and happen, meaning they're probably going to prioritise larger companies who bring in way more revenue. Small businesses on their side of the house are not benefited because they are not prioritised insofar as when an economic shock happens, these small businesses have even more money to like back themselves. So the government isn't going to invest in those small businesses because they aren't bringing any revenue into the New Zealand economy, which is what the New Zealand economy needs to thrive. They need this money. They thirdly tell you that consumers are going to be better off. We actually tell you on our side of the house, Sam brings you all this really great material about why we are super good looking to like prospective firms that might move over to New Zealand to bring in more prosperous business. This is way better for consumers on our side of the house because consumers are able to like get more jobs, whereas on their side of the house, they're probably going to like experience layovers because when inflation happens and like current companies existing in New Zealand can't afford to pay their staff, they probably get laid off from these jobs. We, on our side of the house, bring in companies leading to an increase in jobs, leading to an increase in opportunities for prospective New Zealand workers. This is what, so we actually think we can also claim that benefit of benefiting consumers. Lastly, under this, Sam asks the opposing team a POI, and they say, what happens when New Zealand has no trees? Well, probably everyone in the room laughed at this. The impact of this POI is that companies can't continue to operate when there is a shortage of resources. What we tell you and set out at SAM is that we think it is so important to, they call it hoarding, we call it protecting natural reserves in New Zealand, such as like oil. We tell you that without oil, New Zealand companies can't like manufacture their machines, they can't produce goods, meaning they can't supply goods to customers. This is really bad at the point in like, when you're in the midst of an economic shock, you can't really just stop producing goods because then it's just, you're not helping in any way whatsoever. So on our side, we protect these resources, we protect customers, we protect the economy, and we protect the global image of New Zealand. So proud to affirm.
I thank the speaker for this speech, and now invite the third speaker of the negative team.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. There are two things that we do not have as New Zealand. One, we do not have the time. We do not have the time to wait around for like so much paperwork to go through with regulations. And secondly, we do not have like the money, right? Note that we already flagged to you that our country is in massive amounts of debt. Note when you hoard this money away and you like use it to spend on people, we just end up being in more debt. On our side of the house, we actually incentivize, companies and like trade. We incentivize trade so that we can actually, pay that debt back and have like money to actually fund like what negating stands for. We just think that that shouldn't be the first step in the process. We think the first step in this process is to get money in the bank in general, right? Like we note here, they need to get this money from somewhere, right? The money that they're hoarding. We think that it's either you get this from like trade, which is a lot smarter because not only are you able to form international ties, but you're able to get way more money from richer companies. Or on their side of the house, you get it from taxpayers' money, right? You get it from like just government money that we're already in massive amounts of debt for. I think if you're a government, you're more likely to want to be incentivized to pick trade, because you're not only are you able to form those connections, but you're able to like profit maximize off of this. You're never able to do this when you just have money from like your pre-existing economy. They never get economic growth. Okay, let's deal with some clarification here, right? About what both sides are supposed to stand for, because I think it's a little messy at the moment. Okay, affirmative essentially stands for a side where emergency funds and resources are like used in their back pocket, right? This means that they use these funds to like, I guess they claim to, you know, protect small businesses and stuff, and like these resources, just like in an emergency situation. They claim it's regulation. They claim that like they're not going to use these resources. We know, they're probably going to gatekeep it until like the last possible opportunity where they can use these resources, because they're unique resources that give like people like actual incentive, right? No, neither of these things work though, because at some point, remember, money is finite. You're going to run out of money. At some point, we think the best solution is to make more money, right? Okay. No, we stand for investing in trade movement, which essentially gets us more money. All right, 3 things I'm going to touch on. One, on like the rehabilitation of like economic shock. Sorry, couldn't find better wording. Secondly, on like local businesses, and then thirdly, on international trade relations. But before I get into that, I'll take a POI.
What causes inflation?
You tell me. Okay, cool. I think, but like on a serious note, I think like inflation gets caused by like, you know, when you don't have those international ties, right? Like when you don't have those ties with companies that raise the prices of things. Okay, but I'll get into that later. All right, first, the rehabilitation of economic shock. We tell you that investing in trade and subsidizing trade-related expenses automatically gets you more competition in the game. But let's talk about this one thing first, right? Is like is the actual causes of economic shock? We get this really weird claim on like affirmative that like it's because like people just like sometimes just don't want to buy stuff anymore. No, we don't think that's necessarily the thing that creates huge waves of economic shock. We think it's things like war, what happened with like Russia and Ukraine, and when massive amounts of oil were drained out, people couldn't get to work, those types of things. But we also note here that like when you have like on the rehabilitation of like economic shock, we know that we get more long-term actual benefits. Like I said, like money is extremely finite, and when that money is not yours, then it's money that you're indebted to. Like sure, in their best case scenario, maybe small businesses get like slightly lower prices, and people get slightly lower prices for like a couple of months. But after that's over, you're just in another cycle of debt, and you need to make more money, which you never had the capacity to do because you don't have trading agreements like we get on our side of the house. Note that like with competition, like you actively put companies at the forefront, right? Now they have an incentive to actually, you know, start their businesses, right? They become an integral part of society, and there's like faster output, and you get faster cash flow, right? But the thing with like negating, right, is with these regulations, again, we don't have time to like make all of the, like, we don't have time to sort of delay the process of making money. We need to make money now. Okay. But let's look at local businesses for a second and how they're like impacted, right? Because we know that businesses in general are crucial and integral to like New Zealand society and their economy, right? They say that like when shock hits these businesses ultimately hit a low and they crumble, right? But no, I'm confused at what they think we stand for, because we stand for lowering the taxes of these businesses, actually creating like, you know, we make them more efficient to get into trading. We think that we also expand the branches of who can trade. We have like migrants trading, we have like more investment in trading and these things. And also, they claim to be for businesses. They say that we only help like large corporations on our side of the house. But the thing is, like, if that's what saves people, that's what saves people. But at the same time, we don't think the government is incentivized to like subsidize small businesses either. I think if you're using taxpayers' money, you're probably going to want to use it on like businesses that are good and not businesses that are just like small and nobody really knows about them, right? But also, note that they say that we're not prepared because we don't have backup funds. Again, note that the first thing that you need to do before you get those backup funds is get yourself out of debt so you can actually have money that is yours. But, okay, so let's like weigh the outcomes of like businesses here, right? Because they say that they protect like contributors to the economy. Again, I don't think small businesses are that largely contributive like to the New Zealand economy. Love them, but like I don't think they're like huge stakeholder on what like affects things in this debate. We think that we protect the giant corporations that actually incentivize growth and like lift the barriers of inflation off of the average person in New Zealand. Lastly then, on international trade relations, the first thing that they give us here is that we trade with dodgy actors. Again, we think it's unlikely because that trade relies on your like reputation anyway, but note that like, again, China like probably doesn't have an incentive to buy meat. They probably have incentive to buy things like, you know, semiconductors and like, you know, AI tools. They want to, and like, there's no reason why China would like, you know, invest in material that's super just like niche like meat. We think that they're a country that wants geopolitical power. They're probably not going to invest in niche things like that. The countries that we're specifically talking about are like the states of like the United States and like the UK, right? And where they're meat consuming companies, they know of the countries, they know about us. The next thing that they give us is that people essentially exploit companies, small countries and powers, right? But not because we're a small country, even if like, because big countries tend to be like empathetic to the whole thing about like trading with people who, like Saudi Arabia, who produce oil, because they know we don't have the capacity to create oil on our own, right? We have no choice to trade with him. We need oil. We think it doesn't necessarily, POIs are closed. We don't think it necessarily like matters if it like, yeah, sure, maybe Saudi Arabia, you don't necessarily agree with them, but if it means people can get to work faster, get to work cheaper, we think there's a compromise we're happy to make. The last thing that they give us here is that like, we'll jeopardize values because like we're a smaller country and I guess we'll just get, I don't know, like mean girl syndrome and like get peer pressured into being mean. But like we think that again, trading partners partner themselves with people with similar geopolitical incentives. We think that those political incentives need to align. We think that you're not necessarily like, again, going to trade with like China or Saudi Arabia. We think you're likely to trade with like much richer like westernized states. And we think at the end of this point, we get more global, we get more economic sustainability in New Zealand. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for this speech. As customary, we now switch to speaking orders. I invite the leader of the negative team to give their reply.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I've identified 3 points of clash within today's debate, and I'll tell you on how we won on all 3 of them. Okay, firstly, on the risk of economic shock, which side is able to prove which is more likely in the New Zealand economy. Secondly, which side of the house will actually improve the economy, and thirdly, which side of the house will be able to better improve international relations, right? Okay. Firstly, on economic shock. So they come up here, they told us that economic shock is very likely because like New Zealand is in debt, it's a small country, it's very vulnerable, etc. Right? Okay. First of all, I'll note that like most of the rest of the idea is contingent on the assertion that economic shock will occur. First of all, like there's not a 100% chance that economic shock will occur. They're telling us it's near 100%. I'll tell you why that is not true, right? We have proven to you that economic shock is unlikely to occur due to the mechanism that economic shock will only occur if there's no cash flow or there's an incredibly high increase in necessity products like groceries. But these are all the things that we have preventing on outside the house. We encourage cash flow. We encourage decrease in price of products, right? Okay. Even if let's say economic shock was likely to occur, we actually have plans in place to recover from it, right? Under their side of the house, what do they try to say that they're gonna do in a case of economic shock? Like, yeah, they'll give them money, they'll subsidize them for 2 weeks. After what? Money's finite, you're gone, you're cooked. Okay. Second point, who will improve the economy better? They say that you will improve the economy by having like international companies that go into New Zealand and then they improve the economy. But like, since they're trying to say that, like, let's say we buy their point that economic shock's gonna occur, why would international company comes in then? Because like there's a very high chance of economic shock. Why would they come in? But what do we tell you? We tell you that we will like increase competition. We encourage competition. This decrease prices, which helps the economy. This flows into small business. We help small business because we stand for lowering taxes for them. We stand for lowering restrictions and barriers for them. This helps small business and we improve the economy overall. They generally just not really have any mechanism on how they can improve the economy. That's not like contingent on other good mechanism, right? Okay, finally, now, who will affect international relations more? We tell you that like we're gonna trade with other countries because we don't gatekeep. On this side of the house, they're like giving a bad reputation to New Zealand because they're gatekeeping these technologies, all these things, right? But instead on our side of the house, what are we doing? We can learn new things, we can trade technologies, we will improve our international relations because we show that we're keen to learn and we're keen to like actually like tell them what we know and then they can tell us what they know. Okay, but then what do they say? They say that like it's gonna show that we're like a resilient country, makes other companies want to come in here again. Like if they try so clearly trying to believe that we're in economic shock, why would other countries come in? Okay, finally, what's the overall impact of this? We have the logical primacy, right? Because first, to make money, you must be efficient. You must stand for outside of the house, and then after that, you can like create redundancy. You can create like reserves of money, etc. But like on their side of the house, right? They're gonna like keep a reservoir that's finite. They'll use it. They subsidize groceries for like 2 weeks. After they run out, what now? That is a question that on our side of the house we will never have to ask. Okay, yeah, and then overall at the end of this, right, even if economic shock was to occur, like this side is unable to deal with this in a long-term longevity of time. Meanwhile, we can because we give these like, we have these regulations in place that allow New Zealand to improve as a country, improve our economy. So overall, we weigh that we win on the metric of long-term longevity, right? Because we can continue like putting in these restructures in place, we can make new money, and we also win on scale because we help both large and small business, and that is something that the affirming side will never be able to claim on their side of the house, and that's why we win. Thank you.
I'm going to the speaker for this speech, and now invite the leader of the Affirmative team to close the debate.
I think the issue with side negating's case is they never engage with the fact that to some degree on both sides, economic shocks will happen. So what that means is the debate isn't about how we magically have infinite growth for all of time. It's about firstly who can reduce the amount of economic shocks, and secondly who is able to get through to the other side with the New Zealand economy not on life support. With that, I'm going to do two things: explain why side next case doesn't win, and then secondly go through what we're able to prove. Right, why doesn't side next case win? Firstly, what's the first thing they tell us? They tell us that they will be able to increase price competition by getting like heaps of new firms. Well, I think that firstly, we give you a substantive amount of content on how, like, with certainty, firms are more likely to come to New Zealand. I think that firms are more likely to take a slight economic hit to the marginal profit levels than be operating with the risk that at any moment, like, the New Zealand economy could hit a downturn and therefore cease to operate. That is, like, far more, like, harmful to a firm, so that means that they get less firms. Secondly, they try and tell us that it's better to pay down the debt first. But I think that both sides will need to solve economic shocks, right? And it means that when they pay down the debt, they do not have the liquidity to be able to do a response. This means that they can't stop price hikes by releasing oil reserves. It means that they can't preserve the economy with a wage subsidy. They try and tell us at third that they're going to print more money. 1940s Germany called, they want their inflation back. Right. All of that means that and also even if you buy that it's better to pay down the debt first, then we just go from having one asset to paying down one liability. There was no impacting done on why that's important. Thirdly, they try and tell us that regulation slows things down. Well, but I think firstly, these companies have gotten used to like dealing with this regulation really, really efficiently, right? Because they've done it for so long that filling out things like consent forms just isn't that big of an issue. But secondly, like they're likely to have this kind of regulation on the world stage, right? Because when you're trading with UK, they're going to have regulations on things, which means on both sides you're likely to have a regulation to some degree, which severely limits the scale of which they can claim a benefit. But what is their best case? The best case is even with like minimal mechanisms, they somehow wave a magic wand and the economy gets better. But even if this happens, I think we provide you four harms. Firstly, that the global allies are incredibly furious. This is the international relations content we give you, right? Because we're now cozying up to people like China, like Russia. Secondly, we tell you that people feel incredibly anxious about security because they are waking up in the morning not knowing if their job's going to be there the next day. Thirdly, we tell you that we are utilizing resources that are finite, right? Like trees, like rare minerals, which means that growth is impeded in the long term. But fourthly, we tell you it just goes against New Zealand principles, right? Like, insofar we get rid of regulations, we can't stop companies from trading with, countries that are unethical. What do we prove in this debate? We show you that on their side, they trade with risky actors, right? Who are, and the outcome of this is that they face more economic shocks, right? So the massive harms we bring you about what economic shocks do to an economy, right? Like, there is like job losses that happens more frequently on their side of the house, right? On our side, we are able to have reserves, which means that we are not affected by price spikes when the price of oil jumps up, right? They try and tell you this is like only gonna be 2 weeks, but we think obviously the Treasury will do like forward planning with this. Thirdly, we tell you that we look at more attractive to firms, which directly deals with their point on competition, because certainty and not collapsing is important. And finally, we tell you that we are vulnerable as a small country. They try and say that Saudi Arabia will be nice to us because we're a small country, but I think Saudi Arabia just isn't really an empathetic country that's going to have New Zealand's interests at heart. Because we win, even on their best case, I think you should give us the debate by a big margin, but even if not, we are able to still win through our own substantive material.
Across the floor and shake hands.
Can we get a photo?
Yes, we had one last photo.
I'll just like to get a photo with the judge and the teams if you.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. Yeah. One last photo.
Oh my gosh, this was the last photo.
What do you think about that?
Everybody,